Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Steinke, and I'm here with my coworker, Valerie Theile. We're here to present to you Coloring Outside the Lines, Creative Solutions to Educational Barriers for Children with Chronic Illness. We're hoping that you probably are going to see a few problems that may be arising with your child, with their education due to their chronic illness that sound familiar, and that you'll find creative ways to navigate barriers to get to solutions so your child can learn. Valerie, take it away.
All right, thanks, Sarah. So we wanted to start with some of the basic educational implications. And when we talk to schools, we generally group these in three different categories, three buckets. The physical medical side, the social emotional piece, as well as the cognitive or learning piece. Schools often are really good at that cognitive section, but maybe you don't always think about the first two. So as you talk to your school, we thought it might be helpful for you to think about your own child's needs in these three buckets as you kind of plan with school. I think we also want to make sure you include the effects of disease and the effects of treatment. So Fanconi anemia has its own set of maybe physical issues your child may be facing, but then if they've had something like a bone marrow transplant, that would lead to a lot more additional medical side effects. And then again, thinking about social emotional, the isolation your child may have experienced, which could lead to some social skills deficits, as well as mood changes. And then finally, with the cognitive piece, in addition to any learning difficulties, a lot of kids with chronic illness experience executive functioning difficulties. And then the missed instruction can add on to that as well. So if we think about the physical and medical implications there, we've listed them as well as some different accommodations you could ask school for. And I'm not going to read through this entire list, but basically think about if your child's having fatigue, think about some creative ways to maybe shorten your child's schedule. So if they are, if your child's a younger child and maybe specials are first thing in the morning, maybe your child doesn't go in for specials. Or vice versa, maybe at the end of the day, if your child needs to leave early, think about what would make the most sense and where they need to get the most academic instruction and plan with school from there. In addition, think about shortening the assignments. We always say quality over quantity. And then, getting extended time and breaks, things like that. With illness, honestly, with COVID, we've seen schools doing a lot more cleaning. Schools have found some great ways to clean. I've heard of some different technologies that I didn't know existed prior to COVID, as well as, wiping down desks and seating and water fountains. All of those things schools are actually thinking about right now because of COVID. So in that sense, it's a good time for your child to be in school. Not necessarily don't want them exposed to COVID, but definitely there is a lot more attention to illness. And then if your child has any kind of skeletal anomalies, if they have weakness, think about some of those accommodations as well that could be helpful for your child. Some other ones we listed here are GI issues. So think about that bathroom, making sure your child has access to the bathroom whenever needed. If they have easy bruising, if they're easily susceptible to injury, think about recess, gym class. Make sure school's communicating injuries with you. And then if there's pain your child's experiencing, hopefully if they experience a decent amount of chronic pain, hopefully they've learned some distraction techniques or coping strategies. So you definitely want to communicate those with school. And you also want to think about movement breaks. So sometimes pain is worse when a child sits for a long period of time. So the more opportunity they have to get up and move, even if it's walking down to the office or walking out to their locker or walking to the restroom, those kinds of things can be helpful to help with pain as well. So sometimes there are limited resources with school. And I wanted to stop here because a lot of these end up having to do with the physical accommodations. Different schools have different resources, smaller schools or, rural schools. Sometimes if you're away from other agencies, it can be difficult to get some of these resources that you need. So you definitely have to think outside of the box. As we said earlier, color outside of the lines a little bit. If your child needs a one-on-one aid, and I would say needs, but if they need a one-on-one aid for safety reasons, then I would say if your school says we don't have a one-on-one aid, we don't have that, think creatively. Could there be a substitute teacher who could help? Could there be an agency they could work with to hire somebody? We've also seen potentially schools using other aides from other classrooms. So kind of piecemealing that schedule together if they need to as well. If your child's missing home instruction, kind of also think creatively with school. Maybe you could have what we call compensatory home instruction. So things could continue in the summer if needed. If your child needs special transportation and the school says, well, we can't get that bus back to your house because you live down a gravel road or you live in an apartment complex, you could look at maybe a van, or maybe school could actually, instead of them transporting a child, maybe they could help pay you and supplement you with gas cards to pay you to transport your child. If students aren't allowed to take PE, sometimes there's credit flexibility with that. So sometimes PT can count as the gym credit or PE credit, as well as previous sports and extracurricular activities. And then finally, if your child has an older building, maybe with lack of accessibility, no elevator, but there are stairs and the stairs cause fatigue issues, you can think about some creative ideas there. Even think about if your child's classroom needs to move, then ask school that. I've seen that happen before. Even when I was a teacher, I've seen whole classes move downstairs because the child is using a walker or a wheelchair, and it's just safer for them to be down on the first floor. So those are all things just to kind of think about and discuss with school. And with social, emotional, educational implications, we already talked about the isolation, the deficits. So staying connected is super important. Technology has definitely helped us in this area. So being able to, even if it's just a short Zoom call or Google Meets call with a few kids in the class or the entire class, whatever that might be, that can be really helpful, as well as extracurriculars. So if your child is able to attend school and participate, find some groups they could participate in after school as well. And with mood changes, a lot of schools now have school-based therapists. They have guidance counselors that can help be a check-in person, schedule breaks if needed as well, and allowing them to have just a safe place the kid can go if they are struggling in that moment. And then if there's behavior issues, consistency is really important, as well as the functional behavior assessment. If your child is having significant behavior issues at school that are definitely impeding his or her learning, you can ask school about a functional behavior assessment where they would take a more deep dive to look at your child's behaviors and their needs. And finally, cognitive or academic educational implications. So with missed instruction, home instruction, which Sarah's going to touch on a little bit later, but thinking about what we call compensatory instruction. So again, as I mentioned a couple slides ago, if your child is struggling with doing home instruction on a regular basis because of appointments or medical concerns, then you can bank those hours and basically get those hours at a later time when your child may be feeling better. And that can actually work as well for even if a child is in school, if they're missing enough days here or there, talk to your school to see. Some have a minimum number of days, but some will be flexible if your child has a significant illness like Fanconi, that they may be able to kind of help give some compensatory instruction, tutoring, things like that. And then with executive functioning difficulties, basically that is difficulty with attention, organization, prioritization. So asking school to consider some of these accommodations, giving copies of notes, helping the child learn to organize, maybe chunking material and teaching chunks at a time and building on that, providing study guides. And some of those might be on an IEP or a 504 plan. And then learning difficulties, you know, intervention for your child as needed. So maybe they need a small group to work on their reading, work on their math, and really having school monitor their progress frequently. So I would say at least every 4 weeks that school will be doing some kind of assessment to have an idea where they are. Ideally, it'd be even more than that. If they're using a good intervention, they're able to progress monitor more frequently than that. And again, if your child has significant learning difficulties, they may need an IEP or 504 plan. And I'm sorry I rushed through that, but we definitely want to spend a little more time on content, and hopefully we'll also have time to answer questions and have a little more discussion after our presentation. And I will turn it over to Sarah, I believe.
Yes, so Valerie touched on some of the problems that your child might have and some possible creative solutions. I'm going to touch a little bit on what the government or the law of the schools is owed to you. So every child is entitled to FAPE, which is free and appropriate education, rhymes with CAPE. This is based on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, and it's allowing children with medical conditions or disabilities to get the appropriate education that they're owed. So free, F stands for free, meaning the government pays for it, the tax dollars. Appropriate means the school team has a process to figure out what is the most appropriate plan for your child. A few of the plans are listed here: individual health plan, 504 plan, and an IEP, individual education plan. And Valerie also mentioned getting like a functional behavioral assessment completed by the school. So an individual health plan, just briefly, is a formal agreement between the family and the school that outlines what medical treatment a child is going to need at school, when they're going to get the treatment, who's going to give it, where is it going to be given at. Now, this is a very flexible plan. There's no like laws for states or national rules on how these plans have to look, so the school districts can determine what they look like. So they're very flexible and they can meet children's needs if there's really no educational goals that need to be addressed and it's just purely medical. A 504 plan, this is going to provide your child accommodations to level the playing field for them. It's going to get them access to the same education as their peers, and it's going to level the playing field for any disability or discrimination that's getting in the way of them getting the same education. So for a student that is in a wheelchair, for example, that could mean that they have an elevator access to get up to the second floor. For a student with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, this might mean that the teacher's giving them copies of the notes since it's really hard for them to take notes. So an IEP, or individual education plan, is a plan that is specifically written for that child. There's 13 disabilities that qualify a child for an IEP, and that child then has their own goals that they are graded on and are taught to, so that they can learn and they make progress on, versus being graded on what their peers are graded on. So in the free, appropriate public education, the P stands for public, which means that the public schools are the ones that are providing this education. An IEP team that consists of teachers, parents, and others decide what services and support the student gets. Some private schools can provide these plans, but they don't have to. Some of them have a specific mission to teach kids with autism or dyslexia or whatever. However, they choose to do this, which is very different from having to. The people who run that particular private school can wake up tomorrow and decide not to do that, to change their mission. Public schools, however, never have this choice. They're bound to IDEA and must provide the special education plans that we've listed here and take care of children that have disabilities. So the E stands for education, which can include special education. It can include related services like speech therapy, counseling, or even transportation. The goal is for kids to make progress in school and be prepared for their future. There is so much to know about IEPs, 504 plans, etc. If you want to know more about them, the PowerPoint at the end has some really great websites that can tell you more about them, and we can also answer specific questions. Maybe you've heard of least restrictive environment, LRE, or maybe you haven't, but when people think about special education, they sometimes think about separate classes or schools, but public schools are supposed to have kids who get special education services to learn in the same classroom as other kids as much as possible, and this is the law. The least restrictive environment was passed as part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1975. That's because students with disabilities were routinely segregated. Before that, they were down the hall or in a separate building somewhere in the basement where it was dark and they never really had a chance to interact with any of their peers. And they really didn't get a fair and equal education at all. When talking about LRE placement, where a child learns, is only part of the equation. LRE applies to a student's education entire program, including services. It's a principle that guides the child's educational program. For students that have IEPs, the LRE is documented in that document. So when the process is gone through and the teachers and the family and everyone meet, they are gonna talk about which learning environment is the best for the child. They're gonna have data that's gonna help determine that, and they're going to document it. In general, schools look at placing all students in the least restrictive environment as a guide for best practice. Let's discuss some of the more restrictive environments in greater detail for a few minutes, just in case they're applicable for your child. For students that can't attend school, virtual instruction is now a more widely available option due to the pandemic. Independent, highly motivated learners really do seem to thrive in this environment. Other learners, however, really struggle. And I know that a lot of schools are pulling back on their virtual options because how many kids have not succeeded in this environment. If virtual instruction is the option that you or your school are planning to use, here are some considerations that can be key to virtual instruction success. If virtual instruction for your child requires daily attendance on Zoom or any virtual platform to learn, be sure to discuss with the school a backup plan if you're not able to attend. Maybe you end up in the hospital and you've got the doctors coming in the room, or maybe your child is too ill that day, whatever reason, and they can't get on that Zoom call. What is the plan? Because they're only going to get further and further behind if they can't make the 9 o'clock Zoom call every morning. Maybe it can be that they get virtual instruction by a one-to-one teacher, or maybe there's a home instructor that comes to the home and provides additional instruction as well. Or maybe they have access to recordings of the missed lessons. Online curriculum at times requires more than a teacher would require in the classroom, so modifying the curriculum can also be key. I've noticed in some of the students that I've helped that, you know, if they're doing Algebra 1, for example, that they have to do chapters 1 through 12, every chapter, every section, every quiz, every test, but a teacher in a classroom is never going to cover all of that curriculum. So modifying the curriculum, making sure that if your child's already done some of that curriculum, maybe they attended for the first month or two of school and now they need some time at home because of some illness that's really flaring up. And now they're being put on virtual instruction. They've already covered material. Is there a way to get them excused from that or get them a chance to pre-test so that they can get past the curriculum they already know? And quick side note, many students do not understand what a pre-test is. So if you're working with your child and they see this test and they're like, Mom, Dad, I don't know, or, you know, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to do it. Check if it's a pre-test, tell them just do your best. And you really aren't supposed to know this and it's okay. But anyway, schools can modify the curriculum and cut it down, focusing on quality over quantity. It can also be extremely helpful to have flexible deadlines for online programs, but be sure to balance that with accountability. If a student is too ill for a few days, they can instead have maybe a weekly goal to accomplish or monthly requirements. I would suggest having a key contact at the school that you can check in with consistently to keep the student moving forward or learning the key skills that they need to be on track with their peers. So one other option is homebound instruction, which during the pandemic was not offered very much because not many teachers were going to homes. Now I think it's going to be much more widely used again in this coming year, fortunately. So some school districts continue to provide home instruction virtually. So just keep that in mind. Home instruction provides educational services for all school-age children who are unable to attend school due to orthopedic, non-orthopedic, medical, or psychiatric reasons. So schools may decide that this is the least restrictive environment for your child. Some of the positives of home instruction are that home instructors, sorry, I'm having a hard time saying that word for some reason, are really good at modifying the curriculum typically. This is typically what they do all the time. They typically get the curriculum from the teachers, they modify it. So that's usually a lovely piece of home instruction. Usually it's tailored to the child's needs. It depends on which state you're in, how many hours you get. So that can be a downfall or a good thing. So Ohio, the state that I'm from, says that 1-to-1 instruction for 1 hour a day is equal to a day of school. So they provide 5 hours a week for each student. If your child has periods that they're too ill for home instruction, for example, if they were in ICU at a hospital, or et cetera, compensatory instruction can be requested, and the school can look at whether an extended school year is appropriate. Another thing to be aware of with home instruction is that not all teachers are qualified for every subject. It's hard to find one teacher that can teach, for example, a high school student chemistry and calculus and all of those subjects. So if that is a problem, if they're sending a home instructor to the house that's not qualified for all the subjects, just get really creative with the school and finding solutions and talk to your school about that. So if your child does end up in the hospital, there are some options for instruction while your child is there. Some hospitals have public school teachers. Now, some of those teachers may require enrollment in that school temporarily. I know that that can be a barrier for some families because they have to unenroll or temporarily enroll in another district. Usually that's because that's just how they validate having that teacher there. And some of the public school teachers can possibly still do the curriculum that is from the school that your child regularly attends. So you can just ask about that. Some hospitals have hospital teachers and volunteers like myself who can come into the room or bring your child to the classroom if they're able to go to the classroom and help them with their work from the school and help them keep on track with it. If your hospital doesn't have any teachers, public school or hospital teachers or volunteers that can help with instruction, a lot of hospitals do have liaisons. And liaison, the primary role for a liaison is to support the families, the patient family, the school, and the medical team relative to school planning. Just sort of, they all talk different languages, help them talk the same language. They may help facilitate required documentation, collaborate with team members to assist with short-term and long-term planning as appropriate. If your hospital has none of the above, then you may want to check into if your school has a home instructor or virtual teacher support. And if you are stuck at home with your child for instruction of any sort, I think over the past year and a half, many of us have become pretty good at doing lessons at home. So I'll just remind just a few tips that may just have slipped your mind, but just remind yourself that schedules are critical. They can really help set expectations, maintain a sense of normalcy. They should be set up so that they work for your family's unique situation and don't need to match what other families are doing. The goal is to promote positive mental health for everyone. Your child may only be able to handle 30 minutes and then they might need to move on to something else. If you have to work from home, maybe build in time where you can sit down with your child and answer their questions so that they know when to interrupt, when not to interrupt, or know that they're going to get that help at some point in the day. You can set up an established communication method, handwritten notes, etc. But also make time for reading time, physical activity, lunch, chores, family time, and fun. And don't hesitate to ask for help. Teachers love to help. You may not find the right person when you first contact a school, but if you keep asking around, you're going to find somebody at the school who's really going to want to help you if you're getting stuck with anything any subject with your child, or just ideas on how to engage them, you're going to find somebody. Older siblings can be a great resource. And don't forget that the internet is probably the best resource. If you're trying to help your child and you don't know how to help them with a certain topic or subject, there's a YouTube video for just about anything these days. You can just teach yourself calculus or a new language, etc., just on YouTube. So just do an internet search and see what you can find. And give yourself grace. If it's a bad day, take some extra time for some extra hugs and snuggles. All right, and I'll turn it back over to Valerie now.
Okay, so we recognize that a lot of you are probably in very different places. Obviously, physically, you're across the country. Maybe some of you are from other countries as well. But also in different stages, your child may have different needs. Some of you may be well-versed in IEPs. Some of you may be just starting out on this journey, trying to figure out what's going to work for your kid in education. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what's going to happen when you and school don't agree. So you may have a fantastic school, very supportive school, but there's probably going to come a time where you guys don't see eye to eye. They want to go one direction, you want to go another direction. I see this a lot when Sarah referred to that triangle of the least restrictive environment. This is that can be a big source of contention between school and family, when maybe the family wants their child to be in a resource room because they think they need more individualized help. And school's like, no, that's not their least restrictive environment. And then I've also seen vice versa, where school wants the child to be in a resource room and the parents are like, no, I think they can be supported in a general education classroom. So with all of those potential questions and points of contention, how do you come together to do what's in the best interest of your child? So if I researched this and then also kind of put together what I've seen work. First of all, just speak up and ask questions. Sometimes I work with families and they really haven't talked to school about their concern yet. So I would say approach school in a kind way, but ask them, say, look, I don't quite understand why, if her test scores look like this, are you putting her here? Ask for their reasoning, and maybe that alone will help. Or maybe you'll bring something up. They'll say, oh my gosh, you're totally right. We'll do what you've asked. So just ask. And then also it's important to kind of work through the chain of command. So in a public school district, you're going to want to start with your child's teacher. And if they can't answer your questions, then you can talk to potentially the school psychologist or a school counselor. If they have a 504 or an IEP, then you would talk to the building administrator, so an assistant principal or a principal. If they cannot answer your question or help solve your problem satisfactorily, then you're going to want to go to your district office. And that could be, if your child has an IEP, a special education supervisor or director. If your child does not, that could still be a person you could talk to, or you could potentially work your way up to the superintendent. I have some families that will go straight to the superintendent. If you're in a small district and you have a relationship with that person, that's fine. But if you have a larger district or don't really know the superintendent, I would definitely start lower and kind of work your way up. Another option is an independent education evaluation. So if your child has an evaluation in the school, by the school, it is your right to request at public expense an evaluation from an independent provider. So this could be in any area of evaluation. It could be in the IQ testing, the psychological evaluation, and then you could ask for an independent evaluation at an outside agency from another certified, qualified individual. This could be just in maybe one area, so just in fine motor skills by an occupational therapist. It could be behavioral, and it could be by a behavioral analyst. Sometimes they're called a BCBA. If you don't agree with your school's assessment of your child's behavior. So all of those things you can look into. They're a little more, there can be some intricate details there, but you are permitted to ask that of school. And most of the time they have to oblige if they've done an evaluation of your child already. So that's the key. You have to get them to evaluate your child. You can also look at a temporary compromise. And this is probably one of my favorites. So if you and school don't agree on something, you can ask them to try something for 4 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks tends to be kind of the holy grail of timelines. So ask school, could we try this different classroom for just 6 weeks, and then look at the data, because schools are all about data, and then come back and decide. And you might see that your child didn't need what you were asking for, or school may see they did need what you asked for. So I definitely would recommend talking to school about that. There's something called IEP facilitation. That varies a lot by state, but like here in Ohio, you can actually have someone at no expense help facilitate the IEP meeting. Not quite a mediator, but somebody who is basically an objective person that can kind of come in, a third party. Usually somebody from the state that would just help if the meeting gets contentious, or in the past you've had significant issues and you don't feel like you've been treated respectfully. Sometimes that can help with that. Mediation is another. If you in school don't see eye to eye, you can ask for a mediator to help come up with compromise. And then there's due process. And these last couple really are more for kids with IEPs. But if you think your child's school did not follow the appropriate process into getting the IEP, if they didn't follow timelines, there are different things you can do with that, such as asking for a resolution meeting. You can file a written complaint. There can be a hearing. If you're getting to this point, though, there's potentially could be some bridges burned. So I would definitely save that as a last resort if you truly feel your child needs something that they're not getting, or school isn't doing what they need to be doing. And then there are also alternative options. So again, varies by state and by country, but sometimes, like Sarah had said earlier, there are private schools that may specialize in an area that you need your child to receive extra help in. For instance, here in Cincinnati, we have a special school for kids with dyslexia. There are special schools for kids with autism that she mentioned. In other states, I know there are actually schools that specialize in kids with chronic medical conditions or significant medical needs. Again, those are private, and so those may come at your own cost, but those are things to consider. Charter schools also, those are actually public. Consider public schools, so they are tuition free. The charter school may be an option. And then there are also, honestly, just traditional private schools, like your traditional Catholic school. Some of them want to work with you, and they actually really do want to try to meet your child's needs. So if that is something that's important to you, if you have a faith that you want to see your child receive education in, so whether it be, Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, whatever that faith may be, there could be a private school that would potentially help meet your child's needs. In addition, some districts have open enrollment, meaning anybody, no matter where you live, can enroll. Some states have vouchers or scholarships. Here in Ohio, we have scholarships that are for kids with disabilities or for kids in a low performing school. So again, things to look at within your own state. And then if you decide you want to homeschool your child, that may be the best option for you. However, it might be helpful to look for a homeschool cooperative where you'd be able to interact with other families, kind of work together to pool your resources, and have your child be able to socialize with other kids as well. And that can be really helpful too. And then you might need some options for support. So sometimes there might be parent mentors or support groups that you could utilize. Districts sometimes have parent mentors, and they're district employees. And sometimes families are concerned about using a district employee. However, I have seen those people advocate for a student and disagree with the rest of the school team. They are parents who have a child with a disability and then have been specially trained in IEP 504 regulations, laws, so they can be helpful. So don't be afraid to work with them. And then there could be people within Fanconi here that potentially can help you as well. And then sometimes, like Sarah had mentioned, there are people at the hospital who do, that's what I do primarily as well. Your county and your state may have extra support. So contact your Department of Education at the state level to see what your state could offer you. At the hospital, I just jumped ahead of myself there, but school liaisons, like the work I do, most of you are probably connected in some way to one of those large hospital institutions because your child's care may be so specialized. So if that's the case, you could work with those hospitals because they are going to tend to have more support than a smaller local hospital may. Social workers, though, can provide some support, as well as nurse care managers. They all may be able to provide that correspondence with school to help advocate for your child's needs. And then finally, the last option would be an advocate or an attorney. Legal aid depending on your income, could potentially provide you free support, free legal support. You could also look into educational advocates. Some are free, some you have to pay for, and an education attorney. So if you really, again, feel that your child has been wronged by the school, that they really have messed up in a big way, you may be seeking an attorney. However, again, that is something you would save for the very end of your rope, and I'd be very cautious with, because basically, and attorneys will tell you, once they come into the picture, you've basically burned that bridge with the school. So thinking about, you know, kind of what your child's needs are and thinking about what support you have available could definitely help provide support to you, because it's a lot. It's a lot to take on with everything else you're dealing with for your child's medical issues, and then to add school on top of it. So, and then as Sarah mentioned, these are some of the resources that we recommend that could be helpful to you. And I know at least I think I flew through a lot of material. So there may be a lot of questions, and you may have some very specific questions to your child, and hopefully in the next half hour, 45 minutes with the time we have left, we can address some of those, and potentially maybe even have some side conversations if we need to. So we look forward to meeting you in just a few minutes, and appreciate you joining us for our discussion today.